Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, well, we are moving on with more in our A+ series as usual, and joining us back in the studio yet again, lending himself to us so that we might learn from him, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, glad to have you yet again, sir. How's it going?
Man, it's going great. That's right. Another mini-series within a series. That's right. We are in part 3 of Windows Client Networking, and well, client networking is going to be important, especially even as a help desk technician. If you're a bench tech, happen to be working in maybe you're not working in a corporate environment, maybe you're just working at a the local computer repair store. Keep in mind that networking is very important, right? I know Dan and I, we both really enjoy networking, and you might say to yourself, well, wait a second, Wes. This is A+. We're going to be learning about computers. Why do you spend so many times in our third part here on networking? Well, one of my teachers told me at one point, and I definitely over the years believe that he was right on the money when he said this. He said, if you don't understand networking within today's computing environment, he says, chances are all you're going to do is deliver the computer in a box, and you won't be opening it, right? Because everything that we do today centers around networking, right? Communication and sharing resources. It doesn't matter if you're talking about our mobile devices, doesn't matter if you're talking about laptops, if you're talking about Roku's, even cable television for that matter, right? Everything is networked at some point, so that's why it is very, very important. So let's go ahead and let's move on in some of our objectives. If you guys and gals out there are following along with us, remember this is given a scenario, install and configure Windows networking on a client or desktop. All right. So in the past episodes, we've talked about a lot of different things. Domain setups, we talked about network shares, we talked about things like UNC pass, printers, the different types of network connections you can establish, and we left off with proxy settings, right? Essentially, a proxy is nothing more than kind of like a middleman, if you will, between a client asking for a resource and the resource being delivered. Now, moving on, there are some other things that we also have to be aware of when it comes to basic computing inside of a Windows environment. And this one, a lot of times, really centers around either remote administration, remote support, or both. All right. So the next couple of topics that we're going to talk about are going to be something known as remote desktop. All right, remote desktop connection is the software that runs it, but sometimes you might hear it called remote desktop. It uses a protocol. Remember in our networking, we were talking about different types of protocols, right? And we mentioned that port 3389 RDP remote desktop protocol. Sometimes you'll even hear the jargon as we say, just RDP into that, into that Windows machine, right? And a lot of times what that means is we're using the remote desktop connection software over RDP, right? So that'll be the first thing that we talk about. Now, when we talk about remote desktop connection software, I want you to understand that the way it was explained to me and the way I've been explaining it to people for a few years now, well, ever since I started teaching, is that it allows you to connect over the network from one Windows machine to the next and control that Windows machine that you're connecting to no differently than you would if you sit down in front of it, in front of the monitor, and you log in locally. So what do I mean when I say take control over the desktop? Well, let's go ahead and show you. In fact, I got a couple of machines here, and the great thing is this works in Windows 7, works in Windows 8, 8.1, Vista, pretty much all the same. So you can learn one software, and it applies across all of your editions of Windows, versions of Windows, really. So that is a great thing to keep in mind. Now, the way you find remote desktop connection is a little bit different between the two, so I do want to take a second and show you that, all right? If you're in a Windows 7 box, all right, one of the ways that you can find it is to go to your Start button, right? And from your Start button, you go to All Programs. Then you go to Accessories, and then from Accessories, you'll see there is Remote Desktop Connection. All right, now, if you're in a Windows 8.1 box, it's a little bit different because when I look, well, I don't really have, and let me show you guys and gals out there if you forgot how to log into a Windows machine. Probably should have done that before we started. But I have the modern UI, all right, and one of the things that I don't really see here is, well, the Windows remote desktop connection. So what I can do here is I can type remote, right, and from there I get remote desktop connection. All right. The other thing that you can do in both of the operating systems as well, Windows 7 in the Start search field or the traditional run line, is you can also type mstsc.exe. Now, Keep in mind that this will launch an executable. In Windows 8.1, it is intuitive enough to know that, hey, what you mean here is the remote desktop connection software. But this is actually an executable. It's been around for a long time, and it's been around so long that they really haven't changed the name. Even though today it's called Remote Desktop Connection, in the earlier days it used to be called Microsoft's Terminal Services Client, right? Again, client-server architecture. We'd have a client requesting to make a connection to another machine. The other machine would be considered the server. So it's MSTSC. Now I like to let you guys and gals out there know that because it'll help you when it comes to trying to memorize this little run line command. So that's just a leftover remnants from the earlier terminal services is what it used to be called and was known for a very long time. So it's Microsoft Terminal Services Client. All right, and then I can run remote desktop here. All right. Now that being said, let's talk about a few of the options. Now I kind of did that kind of fast there, so let me show you what we have here, right? So the computer that you're going to connect to is what you are going, the name of the computer or even IP address, okay? Keep in mind that if you use the domain here, or if you use the name here, it's going to rely on a NetBIOS name or it's going to rely on a fully qualified domain name, so it does have to find it. It has to be resolvable. But you can also put an IP address here as well. All right, now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind, too, is that we have a few options, all right? And if I choose that hide options is what it changes to, but if I choose show options, we can actually make modifications, essentially, to how remote desktop connection is going to interact with us. Things like the quality of the connection. If you have a limited amount of bandwidth, you might want to tone down some of the resources that you have so that you get a better connection. It's a more steady connection and it's not as unreliable if you're asking for things like better graphics. Like for instance, we can, when we talk about display, right? I can modify how high I want the quality of the color, right? And I can say, hey, go ahead and display it in full screen, right? Experience, we can go a little bit even farther than that, right? I always use these detect the quality automatically, and Windows will do it. And if it senses that you have a limited connection, it'll kind of throttle down the resources that it's using. But you can even tell it. You can define what kind of setting you have. A lot of times, ladies and gentlemen out there, I really just leave this to, what it wants to detect it at. All right, let's see here. Advanced server authentication, we're not going to worry about this. If you're on the external, an external network, you might have to put in what's known as a remote service, or it's called an RDS gateway, a remote desktop services gateway. Again, I wouldn't worry about that for this exam. However, you can also say, hey, do we want to display the remote audio, which means that if I do something like Wes likes to do, I like to do something wrong, and you get the little Windows chime that comes out. That says, hey, do you want to send that back over your connection? How do you want to interact with a keyboard? And this one is really, really important. I absolutely love this one because there's times that on my, let's say on my Windows 8 machine, I have a file and I want to send it to the machine that I'm connecting to. Well, I can also do choose more, and I could say, you know what, go ahead and let me connect my local drive on this machine so that when I need to, over the connection, I can take, for instance, a driver and I can send it over to that machine that I'm connecting to remotely. That's why I said it's a little bit between remote administration and actual sometimes help desk as well.
I love that drives that I plug in later, because we always have that USB drive laying around and we're like, oh yeah, it's on the USB drive. Click, now I gotta reconnect and make sure. No, you just make sure that's plugged in every time you plug your flash drive in, and there it just pops up. And
that's a great point. I want to kind of expand that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Keep in mind that if you make a connection and these settings aren't set, just like Dan said, if you remember after the fact, that's okay. Just go ahead and cancel the connection, close it down, and then you can reconnect. Or close it down, modify the options, and then reconnect. All right, so that's a little bit about the option that you can see. I do want you guys out there to keep in mind that there are some things that you got to set up to allow remote desktop connection to work. So we're going to connect over to a Windows 7 machine. But before we do that, let's ensure that our Windows 7 machine is configured correctly to receive the incoming connections. And there's one of the things I want you to understand what you have to do. I want you to remember you got to get your system control panel, and not computer. You got to get the system control panel, and you can just push the start button if you want. You can right click and you can choose properties, or you can go the other ways that we've shown you through the control panel. Notice that we have a couple of task links here. One of them's remote settings, right? And this brings up your system properties dialog box. All right, and you have 3 options here. All right, now by default, exam alert, and by the way, exam alert. Remote desktop is disabled by default. Okay, now notice that when I opened this dialog box, it said, all right, allow the connections. That is not the default setting. I want you to understand that, and I'm going to compare and contrast that to another remote connection that you can make. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is not only when you turn this on, you also have to worry about this little warning that it's giving you here. All right, it's letting you know that this computer is set to go to sleep or hibernation when not in use, right? People cannot connect to a machine that's in a hibernated state, right? I mean, it's essentially turned off. All right, so keep that in mind as well. The next thing I want to let you guys know is, and let me just double check and make sure, guys, I don't think I modified anything. All right, the other thing you also have to keep in mind, too, is that you have a potential for firewall settings to get in the way. All right, if firewall settings get in the way, you're not going to be able to communicate, too. All right, so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to drop down. A lot of times it'll set it by default. I have found in times, in certain circumstances, you know computing, Dan, it doesn't always work the way we want it for sure, that the firewall doesn't allow the exceptions through the firewall. So let me go ahead and drop down to our firewall here real quick and show you where we can modify that. So we're going to go to Start, we're going to go to Control Panel, we're going to go to System and Security, and we're going to look at our firewall settings in the Windows Firewall. All right, now remember, it doesn't say exceptions. In the exam objectives, we talk about configuration, we talk about exceptions, but what does it mean for an exception? Well, the rule is, by default, that the Windows Firewall blocks everything coming inbound from another computer to your machine, which would include remote desktop by default. So I have to make an exception to the rule, right? The rule is everything's blocked. We allow an application through the firewall. We're making an exception to the rule. So we would choose allow an application through the firewall. Now, when we go here, understand that this is an administrative privilege, right? Dan and I, we've talked about in other episodes the user account control, and I think, Dan, you mentioned the little shield here. If I see the shield, I have to be an administrator. Now, since I'm already in an administrative account, you see how it's grayed out? I'm not worried about it. The other thing that you could tell, too, is that this entire section, oops, sorry, guys, this entire section would be grayed out. And then you push the button, change settings, and it's like you can see here, it darkens up a little bit. But in this list, we have to make sure, you notice this setting right here, remote desktop. All right, I have to make sure that the remote desktop is checked. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind is that we have profiles, all right, inside of the Windows Firewall. All right, now these profiles are directly related to network location. All right, your Windows operating supports something known as NLA, Network Location Awareness. All right, now what does that mean? That sounds like it's big old, you know, high-tech technology. Well, and for the most part, it's cool technology, but it's not really high-tech. Just means that if you make a choice on which network you're connected to, software can be aware of that and also make configurations to the Windows Firewall. And what we mean by that is you have 3 different network locations, all right? A potential for one to be a 4th one, if you will, because it's called work as well. So you have home, work, and public, all right? You also have domain, which is the 4th one, I should say, because domain shows up when, like this computer, it's joined to a domain. Domain and work are pretty much close to the same thing. By default, domain does not turn on network discovery. However, in home and work, network discovery is turned on, and that means that other computers can find you on the network, right? So when you have a network setting, or you set the network to home, what you have is inside of the Windows Firewall, you have a profile that is configured, all right? And it means that it's a global suite of settings based on the choice, the network location that you've set, all right? If you choose the public profile, the public setting, network location, then it's the most restrictive, all right? Because, you know, you don't want to go into a hotspot, a public location, and have people be able to share files with your machine by default, be able to discover your computer. So it shuts off things like network discovery. It shuts off things like your public file sharing. So understand a little bit about what's going on here, and remember which location you are, which network you've selected, because just because I have remote desktop turned on, if my network location changes, let's say to public, I won't be able to, and I know my head's kind of covering up, there we go. If it changes to public, I won't be able to connect, right? So I would have to come in here and check that setting to allow that to happen, and it's up to you whether you do that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and oh, and that's network discovery. That's not what I want. So wrong setting. Let's turn that off. Let's go back to remote desktop and just make sure that it is set to across all of the different profiles, and it is set to all three. All right, and I'll choose OK. And now what we've done is configured it. Now keep in mind, we've talked about in other episodes too that you can also disable the firewall here. We don't disable firewalls, all right?
Where's the fun in that, Wes?
That's right, that's right. Leave the front door to your house open and then walk away for a couple of days.
And then sprinkle diamonds, like, on the porch.
That's right. No, that would be bad, yeah. Right? I will tell you that in some instances, if you believe the firewall is causing an issue, you can disable it temporarily just to find out if you've misconfigured it. However, you always turn it back on. All right, so it looks, we'll keep our fingers crossed here, Dan, that we do have remote desktop configured correctly. Now let me show you what I mean when I say remote desktop allows you to take control of the desktop. All right, we're going to switch back over to our Windows 8.1 machine. All right, I'm going to put in the computer name, which I pretty much already have here, and my username, and I'm going to choose connect. All right, now if this is connecting, all right, you get an authentication dialog box. That's what you want to see. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to break this for a second because on purpose, because I want to show you what would happen if your network adapter is not, is something wrong with your network adapter, your computer's in the hibernate state, like it warned you there, or if your firewall is blocking this. So let me show you here real quick what it would look like if it doesn't connect, all right? It does give you a warning. So I'm just going to disable remote desktop here, and that'll cause it to throw the error. All right, and you'll notice right away how it doesn't go right to the dialog box. That's a telltale sign that something's wrong. You don't know what's wrong at this point. Again, it could be the firewall. It could be the computer's in a hibernation or a sleep state.
It's erasing the C drive.
Erasing the C drive, that's right. Downloading a virus to your machine. But notice that it does give you a warning here. Remote access to the server is not enabled. Now, keep in mind, the server is a mindset of the operating system, or a functionality, if you will. It just means that that computer is not receiving an incoming connection.
I like how they do give you a really good idea of the most common possibilities of why you're not connecting, right? The remote computer is not available on the network. It could be on, sitting there, going, I want connections all day long, but the cable got unplugged, you know?
Yes,
or the port on the switch that it's plugged into died, and it's just unavailable at this point in time. The network connection is down altogether. There's no, the ISP had a fiber cut. You never know. These things can happen, so don't just, I mean, you obviously want to check, hey, you know, call someone. Can you go and check and make sure that computer's turned on? I've had to do that.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Oh, yeah, the lights are on. Okay, now I got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, at least it gives you some kind of indication of what's going on. So let's go ahead and let's fix the problem. No, the problem in this case is not that Wes was touching the keyboard. And we'll go ahead.
It was you. It was like, just shut all the blinds. Don't answer the door.
Wes, step away from the keyboard. That's right. So we'll go ahead and say OK to this, and then we're going to reconnect. And I want to go ahead and show you that when I log into this machine, let me go ahead and log in and show you what happens. I got locked out of the Windows 7 box, right? If I do Control-Alt-Delete, notice it tells me that I'm logged on remotely, and then it gives you the name here. Let's see if we can, yeah, you can see the name. Remember, this is why we say taking control of the desktop. Only one person can be logged into a Windows machine controlling the desktop at one time, right? That isn't a limitation inside a Unix-based system or a Linux system, right? Linux systems are true multi-user systems in the fact that you can have multiple sessions logged into a single physical piece of hardware. That's not the case with Windows. So that's what we mean when we say taking control of the desktop. Did you notice I just basically wrestled it away from the instance that I was logged into? All right, the other thing to keep in mind when we say taking control over the desktop, and you can see we still have the Windows control panel open just like we did, is the fact that let's say Dan wants to help me do something, but he wants me to see what's going on. Remote desktop is not a good solution for that, because if you notice, I cannot see what's going on.
Yeah, no collaboration when it comes to remote desktop. It's like when you said at the beginning this was basically for remote administration. That was nail on the head right there.
Right.
Systems administrators, or you know that you've got, they're not going to be there. They're going to be at lunch. Hey, I'm going to take over your computer because you got admin rights, and you don't need any outside help from anybody. You're just going to log in, do whatever work you have to do, When you're done, you disconnect and it's all said and done. But that's when we get into remote assistance, right,
That's
Wes?
absolutely correct, and that's going to be the next one that we're going to tackle right here. But I do want to give props out because we always got our good our viewers out there in the chat room that always chime in with some very good advice, right? And what we have in the chat room, I know you can't see it right now, is that you've mistyped the IP address. All right, that is a great thing to keep in mind. And let me show you real quick because there's another one too. You can mistype the name too. Same results would apply. Notice that I get this log off ability. Right, and my normal start button, if you will, I can disconnect or I can log off. Let me tell you what I always do. I always log off of a machine, and here's why. Because if I stay logged on, there are certain times when that can be problematic. If you stay logged off and you just disconnect, your session is still active, right? And that could be consuming resources on a machine that maybe you don't want to consume.
That's the way Daddy likes it, though.
That's right. So the next thing that we're going to do is let's move into one that Dan talked about, right? Where we want to actually share control over the desktop. Now, in order to do this, you're going to use something known as remote assistance. Like Dan mentioned, let's go ahead and let's get logged back into our Windows 7 machine. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to fire up a remote assistance connection, right? And we'll show you how to share control over the desktop. So in this situation, there's a couple of different things that we can do. One of the easiest ways to find remote assistance is to essentially do nothing more than, well, a couple different ways. If I go to all programs, I believe it's accessories, and I believe if I come down here to tools, system tools, I believe we find remote assistance in there. And I am not seeing, it's been a while since I've actually... Yeah, it's been a while since I've actually launched it up, but here's the way I typically find remote assistance. There is an executable called MSRA, and it is an executable, so know that just in case they ask you on the exam. The other place that I know you can get to it as well is if I go to, where is I'm trying to remember, our help, oops, I don't know, I got caps lock on here. Help and support, right, is another place that I know you can get to it. And what we can do is we can ask. Notice that we have an option here, right? We can ask, and I believe this is where you can get help as soon as it gets through its help content here. Let's see if I cancel that out. There we go. So if I notice that I say ask a person for help, you can launch it through a hyperlink. So there's a couple different ways, help and support, you can get to it. I really like the MSRA. And again, this is just because I don't have to sit around, I don't have to search around for it. I just type MSRA, and that's just short for Microsoft Remote Assistance. All right. Now, when you do this, what you're going to do is there's a couple of things that you can do. Largely speaking, what we do more often than not is we end up sending what is known as an invitation, right? And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this when you send an invitation like this. Essentially, I have to invite somebody. I can ask somebody, essentially, hey, I need your help. I need you to show me how to do whatever it might be inside of the operating system. And we can see the remote assistance window come up here, right? So there's two sides of the tracks, all right? Invite somebody you trust to help, all right? And there's a couple of different ways. Now, if you're on the same network, you could have used this Easy Connect if we're on the same network. But I'm not on the same network, so what I'm going to do is save this to an invitation file. Now, I have to save it to a common location where, let's say, Dan could get a hold of it. So let me go ahead and kind of double back on something we showed you guys in an earlier part here in client networking. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up Windows Explorer. And we didn't show you this. We showed you this in Windows 8.1, but I didn't show you how to do this inside of the Windows Explorer in Windows 7. So if I choose Computer, up here at the top, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to map a network drive. And we're going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm just going to call this F drive like I did in the first part here, and I'm going to essentially use that network share that we had out there on the network. I'll choose Finish, and if I do, there we go. So I need a place to store this where the person who's going to help me can get a hold of this file, and I'll go ahead and say Save an Invitation File, and I'm going to save it to that location, that network share that we just mapped, all right? And notice that it says Invitation, and you can see the extension here. We'll go ahead and choose Save. Now, keep this dialog box open, right? Because this is essentially a password that you're going to need after opening the firewall, or excuse me, after opening the invitation file. All right, so let's go ahead and let's jump over to our Windows 8.1 machine. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the modern UI, Metro UI as they used to call it, and type MS as well, and you can see it's executable. And now notice it says help someone who's invited you. All right, so we're going to say, we're going to go ahead and choose that to help somebody who's invited me. Oh, and you know what? It looks like it failed back on the network connections again. Let me cancel that out and see what happened there with my network connection. No? All right, let's see here. I should be. I'm going to do a little troubleshooting here real quick. Okay, so I still have access. I wanted to make sure that I do. All right, so let's close. Oh, and you know what? We've got to. I still got the VPN. That's what it is. I cannot do this over a VPN communication. That would cause problems. That's why it's telling me that I do have an internet connection when technically I don't. Remember, we showed you using the VPN communication. I actually just. Oh, let me go ahead and disconnect here real quick. Disconnect that. There we go. That should help. And it is disconnected. And let me make sure that I'm on the right adapter. Again, got to be on the right adapter, right network for this to work, or it will not connect. All right, so
that's the way.
A little bit of troubleshooting right there on, you know, right there on camera. I wish I could tell you I meant to do that.
Yeah.
All right, and you have to be able to type MSRA appropriately. So MSRA, and there we go. There's the Microsoft Remote Assistance connection. And now we're going to choose help somebody who has invited you. All right. Now notice it's telling me that I can use Easy Connect. In this case, we got an invitation file. All right. When we choose invitation file, it's already connected to that location. I could browse to the location, but since I'm already connected directly to it, I do see that I have this invitation file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click it. And then it should ask me for that password. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type this password here. That's what, B6. This is going to be fun. Sorry guys for this back and forth here. And that is what, LQ2. And I believe that was ZZ4TK. And then what was the last one? TKQ. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to choose OK. Now, I have to switch back over to my Windows 7 machine because it's asking me, do you want to allow the administrator to connect to your computer? So remember, I'm making a connection to the Windows 7 machine. All right. So now it tells me, it says the color scheme has changed to Visual Basic, Visual Basic, wrong software, and that's because I'm on a different connection. It doesn't use the arrow theme because it wants to try to give you the best connection quality. Exactly. Yeah. You know, you don't want, especially if we're in a help desk situation and I want people to be able to see what's going on. I don't care about all those flashy little images. I just want to be able to help them.
Yeah, rounded edges aren't really helping me get the problem solved.
Right? That's for sure, right? So here, notice that this is my screen on the Windows 8.1 machine, and I do have the ability to request control. Now, you have to be careful if you're doing this in a lab environment. You have to remember which screen you're looking at, because if I request control, it shows up what looks like my desktop. But that isn't my desktop. We're sharing control of the desktop, so I have to flip back over to the Windows 7 machine that we're connected to and say, yes, I'll allow that. Now, notice what it lets me know. It says your helper is sharing control over your computer. So this is our Windows 7 machine, and yes, I can move things around, right? I'm sitting in front of this desktop. But if Dan was connecting to this and helping, well, guess what? Now he can move it around too. So he could say, all right, Wes, I want you to know how to get to Control Panel, and I need you to look at Windows Defender. All right, so he says push Start. He says go to Control Panel. Now, he can do it, too, if I get lost, right? And then he says, I need you to switch to Category View. I know this is what you're seeing by default, and go to Large Icons. Well, if I switch back over to the Windows 7 machine, all of this is basically happening the same way in real time. See that? Right? And then you could say, well, scroll down to the bottom and you'll see Windows Defender. So we're sharing control over the desktop, and that is a great thing to keep in mind. All right, so that's a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and let's close this out. I'll stop sharing, and actually I want to go ahead and I want to just close the Windows Remote Assistance down and do understand that. All right, now the last couple of things that I want to show you, and I know we're running short on time here, is a little bit about just configuring your IP addresses, and I also want to show you the network card properties. But I will tell you, Dan, it does look like we might even have to go into a part 4 on this one.
Yeah, that might be just too big of a bite for us to get within the limited time that we have, which is none. So Wes, I guess we're rolling into that P4, so everybody join us for that one. As for this episode, it looks like we are done, right? Thanks for watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.